my cluster project deals with the transition period from manuscript culture to printed culture, specifically in Jewish culture. And as an art historian, I'm primarily interested in how all this relates to the visual language, visual culture, the visual language, illustration. How did these changes affect the work of the scribes, the illustrators, the wishes of the commissioners and the readership? Already as a child, I was fascinated by the physical touch with the past, and I liked or loved archaeological excavation in particular. Back then, I didn't know that there existed at all parchment books. And still today, after 30 years of work, when I come to a manuscript room and a book is laid out before me, and I know that some 700 or 800 years ago, somebody handled it, somebody touched it, somebody made it, somebody read it, still gives me the thrill. I think that any historical research is important because we define ourselves, we build our identities, and we understand ourselves via history. And this does not only concern our own history, but also the history of other societies. They're all entangled. And specifically, this interest in the transition from manuscript to printed book has some sort of topical relevance, as we are now living in a similar phase. We are in a transition from the printed medium to the e-book, and already for several decades we are actually occupied with this transition. Some people find this very exciting. Some people see the potential and the possibilities. Others have anxieties about their own traditional cultural values, and in the 15th century that was pretty much the same. Research into visual culture very often starts with comparison. We can compare the visual language or the imagery of a 15th century book with those of a 13th or 14th century book, and through this comparison we can actually point out and first of all observe and then point out at certain changes that took place during that period. Once we understand what the changes were, we have to contextualize them in the social and cultural fabric of the period of the society that actually makes these books, specifically Jewish society, and then we can come to terms with more far-reaching questions than just the technical issues. So far, I can see that that people who were entrusted with the production of books, of handwritten books, during the decades before the invention of the press, started to think in terms of reproduction. They thought of different circles of clientele. They began to think of possibilities how to address a larger audience. The manuscript is usually, especially the manuscript of the 13th and 14th century, is usually a book that is individually geared to a certain commissioner. It is his personal book, whereas the printed book is addressed at a large audience that is at first sight homogeneous, but in fact it actually is not as homogeneous as one might think.